I've always been very moved by the movements of the mouth and the shape of the mouth and the teeth, and I like the, you may say, the glitter and colour that comes from the mouth. And I've always hoped, in a sense, to be able to paint the mouth like Monet painted a sunset, but I've never succeeded in doing it. But I was also very influenced by the Eisenstein film, the Potemkin, and the Odessa sequence, in which there's this wonderful shot of the nurse screaming. And also, when I first went to Paris, I found in an old bookshop a book on diseases of the mouth, which was beautifully coloured, hand-coloured. The plates were hand-coloured, and that it had a tremendous effect on me. And I don't know if this obsession when I was much younger with the mouth has a lot of sexual implications, as people say it may have, and I believe psychologically it is supposed to. But anyhow, whatever it was, I was at that time very obsessed by that image.
So you might well have been interested in painting open mouths and teeth, even if you hadn't been painting the screen.
I think I might.
Nevertheless, yes. You did become involved with painting the human screen.
I did, and I've always hoped, I've always wanted and never succeeded in also painting the smile, but I have never been able to do it.
Actually, in your work as a whole, there are relatively few paintings that have ostensible subjects which might be called horrific, and most of them are fairly straight subjects of figures seated in rooms and so on, and yet people have a sense that your work as a whole is horrific. Why do you think this might be?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, you may say the carcasses of meat. It's true that when you go into a butcher's shop, you see the beauty of the meat, how beautiful meat can be. But when you think about it, also, you can think of the whole horror of life, of one thing living off another, and the natural pattern of life, and the natural sequence of life. I mean, it's why when all these stupid things about bullfighting, because if you go, people will eat meat and then complain about bullfighting. The thing is so mad. They will go in and complain about bullfighting covered with furs and birds in their hair. I mean, it's so illogical.
But yet people's sense of your work as being horrific is not really justified by the ostensible subject matter. Why do you think they have this feeling that it is?
Well, the thing is, I've always hoped to put over things as directly and rawly as I possibly can, and perhaps if a thing comes across directly, they feel that is horrific.
Yes,
because if you say something, even if you say something very directly to somebody about something, they are sometimes offended, although it is a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Because people tend to be offended by facts, or what used to be called truth.
Let us say that you have a model, somebody you have already painted many times from memory.
Yes.
Have you ever had such a person sitting for you?
Yes.
And what has happened?
They inhibit me. They inhibit me because one of the things is I would, if I like them, I don't want to practice the injury that I do to them in my work before them, if I like them. I would rather practice the injury in private, by which I think I can record the fact of them more clearly.
In what sense do you conceive it as an injury?
Well, because people nearly always believe that the distortions of them are an injury to them, no matter how much they feel for or how much they like you. They do nevertheless, as most of them are not people who are concerned with art, feel the distortions are forms of injury.
Don't you think their instinct is probably right?
Possibly.
Do you not think that when you talk about recording different levels, among other things you may be doing, is precisely expressing at one and the same time a love of the person being painted and a hostility towards them, and that the marks you are making are both a caress and a blow, an assault?
I think that this thing is how, I think it goes to a deeper thing than this. I think is how do I feel, and this can only be feeling, how can I make this image more immediately real to myself? That's all.
Could you not be making it more immediately real by summing up at one and the same time contradictory feelings towards what you're painting? That would be making it very real, I would have thought.
Well, I think that then you would be going into psychological ways of, of seeing. And I don't think that most painters do. I think most painters are actually, at any rate today, are attempting to bring over the image that they want to record as strongly and as immediately as possible onto the nervous system, and it is not actually as involved, although it may be subconsciously involved with what you say, but I don't think it's consciously involved at all.
If it was consciously involved, the result would be disastrous. But don't you think, and this is why I say that your sitter instinctively sees this as an injury, which in a sense might be thought naive, but I'm suggesting that the sitter's instinct is right.
It may be right.
In realising what's really going on.
What you're really saying is that what Wilde said, you kill the thing you love.
In the paintings of men in rooms, there's somehow people feel there's a sense of claustrophobia and unease there. Are you aware of this yourself?
Well, I'm not aware of it, but the thing is that most of those pictures were done of somebody who was always in a state of unease. And whether that has been conveyed through these pictures, I don't know. But I suppose in attempting to trap this image, that, and as this man was very neurotic and very almost hysterical, that may possibly have come across in the paintings.
It's interesting that people want to read meanings into your pictures as if they were problem pictures or narrative pictures of some sort.
But one wants to read. People like to get a meaning from everything.
But they want to get a sort of story, don't they? Or to see the pictures as a kind of comment.
They do,
on
yes.
society.
They do.
Is it ever intended to be that?
No.
When you do paintings, say, of nudes in rooms,
yes,
male nudes,
yes,
sprawling across sofas or anything,
yes,
do you have in mind someone else, or do you sometimes think of them as yourself?
No, I think of them not as of myself. I think of them. Some of those things have come from photographs that I have, and some of them have come from the Muybridge book of the human body and movement, which I have very often used figures from. But I don't think of them as myself. But it's true to say that, of course, that when you paint anything, you are at the same. You are also painting not only the subject, but you are painting yourself as well as the object that you're trying to record, because painting is a double, is a dual performance. Because, for instance, if you look at a Rembrandt painting, you know, I feel I know very much more about Rembrandt than I do about the sitter.
So in the first place, so you use existing photographs that you've come across,
Yes.
like those in Muybridge.
Yes.
And then you use photographs like this, which you've had taken in order to paint from,
Yes.
instead of getting a model to come and pose.
I have, yes. In fact, even from friends who will come and pose, I've had their photographs taken for portraits, because I very much prefer working
From the photographs?
From the photograph than from them.
But then you've also used photographs of works of art.
Well, I have, and I think most unsuccessfully, because I think it's already so remarkable that there's absolutely really nothing to do about it, but I used it out of obsession. I don't think that any of these things that I have done from other paintings actually have ever worked.
In spite of the terrific importance that you give to the paint itself in an artist like Velázquez and Rembrandt, you paint again and again from photographs. I mean, when you were in Rome, you went to see the Velázquez, the Innocent.
No, I didn't.
You never went?
No.
How long were you there?
I was in Rome for about 2 months.
And you never actually went to see this painting which you'd been working
I didn't.
after for years?
No. It's true to say that at that time I was extremely unhappy emotionally, and I loathed churches, but I spent most of my time in St. Peter's, just wandering around. But I think another thing was probably a fear of seeing the reality of the Velázquez after my tampering with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was probably a feeling of seeing this marvelous paint, at least what I'd always thought as a marvelous painting in photographs, and then seeing the stupid things that one had done with it.
You've also got a lot of things around here of your own, I mean, reproductions of your own work. Do you look at them while you're working?
Well, I do very, very often. I very often think that I will be able to, for instance, I've been trying in this particular one to make this image which I did in 1952, and I've been trying to make this into a mirror so that this image is crouched before a mirror of itself. It hasn't come off, but I very often find I can work from photographs of my own things that have been done years before, and they become very suggestive.
Do you make any use of preliminary studies or sketches of any sort?
Yes, I do. I nearly always make a sketch.
Drawn or gouache or something?
I generally just make it out of with thin paint, and especially in portraits, I make a kind of outline of the position in which I want to try. I think I want to make the image, but after that, chance and chance and what I call accident takes over. And if anything ever does work, in my case, it works from that moment when consciously I don't know what I'm doing.
When you say chance, you mean something more than improvisation? You mean as if you're really working without making conscious decisions?
They're certainly not conscious decisions.
But what are you thinking about? I mean, how do you suspend the operation of rational decisions?
I'm thinking of nothing but at that moment, I'm thinking of nothing but how hopeless and impossible this thing is to achieve. And by making these marks about which I don't know how they will behave, suddenly there comes something which your instinct seizes on as being for a moment the thing by which it could begin to develop.
How much does it help to have had a certain amount of drink when you're painting?
Well, this is a difficult thing to say. I haven't done many things when I have had a lot to drink, but I have one or two, and I did the crucifixion in 1963.
Which was one of the best things.
And that was done when I was on drink for about a fortnight, and perhaps it was, sometimes it loosens you, and I think it works better, but it's, again, I think it also dulls other areas.
You really don't want to lose a certain clarity. You don't want to leave too much to chance, do you?
I want a very ordered image, but I want it to have come about by chance.
It's a matter of reconciling opposites, I suppose, of making the thing be contradictory things at once.
Well, it isn't just that one wants a thing to be as factual as possible, and at the same time as deeply suggestive or deeply unlocking of areas of sensation other than the simple illustration of the object that you set out to do. Isn't that what all art is about? If you think of the great Rembrandt self-portrait in Aix-en-Provence, for instance, and if you analyze it, you will see that there are hardly any sockets to the eyes. That is, it is almost completely anti-illustrational. And when the brutal, so-called brutal painting of a Jackson Pollock or something like that, I forget what that painting is called. What is the technical term for it?
Well, abstract expressionism.
Abstract expressionism, that of course all that had been done by Rembrandt in a painting like the self-portrait in Aix-en-Provence, but it had been done with the added thing that it was an attempt to record a fact, which was Rembrandt's own appearance. And to me, therefore, must be much more exciting and much more profound. Inevitably, he's trying to do something much more difficult.
You're very preoccupied with chance in painting. You're also preoccupied in chance with gambling.
The thing is that I do remember once when I lived once for a long time in Monte Carlo, and I became very obsessed by the casino, and I spent whole days there, and I used to think that I heard the croupiers calling out the numbers at roulette, the winning number, before the ball had fallen into the socket. And I used to go from table to table, and I remember one afternoon I went in there and I was playing on 3 different tables, and I heard these echoes, and I was playing rather small stakes, but at the end of that afternoon, chance had been very much on my side, and I ended up with about £1,600, the equivalent in francs, which was a lot of money for me then. Well, I immediately took a villa, and I stocked it with drink and all the food that I could buy in. But this chance didn't last very long, because in about 10 days' time, I could hardly buy my fare out of the back to London from Monte Carlo. But it was a marvelous 10 days, and I had an enormous number of friends.
You don't think you're working an obsession with Christianity out of your system?
Well, I don't think so, because my common sense would not allow me to accept Christianity.
It might not allow you to accept it, but you're sure you've got rid of it?
Well, that one can never know, because one knows how very potent some of the images of Christianity have been, and how they must have played very deeply on one's sensibility. So one could never say that one's completely got away. And after all, without believing one believes in the ethics of Christianity, or a great number of them, without actually believing in the practice of the church.
When you do a crucifixion, I mean, you've done triptychs based on figures.
Yes.
And you've done these fairly complicated crucifixion images. What is the difference in the attitude of working when you start on a crucifixion?
Well, of course, you're working then about your own feelings and sensations, really. You might say it's almost like nearer to a self-portrait, that you are working on all sorts of very private feelings about behavior and about the way life is.
And the crucifixion is the armature for expressing it? It
is, yes.
You often involve the painting of sides of meat in your paintings of the crucifixion.
The subject of meat is such a marvellous subject matter, and of course naturally meat has enormous overtones to it. I've used photographs, and if you go into some of these great stores where you just go through these great halls of death, you can see meat and fish and birds and everything else all lying dead there. There have been extraordinary photographs which have been done of animals just being taken up before they were slaughtered. And I think these pictures were very much based on that kind of thing, which to me is very, very near this whole thing of the crucifixion. I know for religious people, for Christians, the crucifixion has a totally different significance. But as a non-believer, it has just an act of man's behavior, way of behavior to another. As man realizes that he is an accident and his futility, that he's a completely really futile being, that he has to play out the game without reason. I think that even when Velázquez was painting, even when Rembrandt was painting, in a peculiar way, they were still, whatever their attitude to life was, they were still slightly conditioned by certain types of religious possibilities, which man now, you could say, has been completely cancelled out for him. Now, of course, man can only attempt to make something very, very positive by trying to beguile himself for a time by the way he behaves, by prolonging possibly his life, by buying a kind of immortality through the doctors. You see, painting has now become, or all art has now become, completely a game by which man distracts himself. What is fascinating, actually, is that it's going to become much more difficult for the artist because he must really deepen the game to be any good at all and return the onlooker to life more violently.